Well, welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined yet again by Ben Habib, the Brexit firebrand, former Reform UK co-deputy leader, and now shaking up British politics. Born in Pakistan, forged in Cambridge and finance, Ben's a patriot fighting for a sovereign, prosperous UK. From clashing with Nigel Farage to defending Tommy Robinson, he is regularly sparking debate with free speech protests, Labour's woes, and the passing of Pope Francis in the headlines. I'm delighted that Ben is here to share his bold vision. Welcome back to the show, Ben.
Well, thank you very much for having me on, Andrew. Delighted to be back.
It's always a joy. I want to take you all the way back, actually, to your family's escape from Pakistan's turmoil. It shaped your distrust of centralized power, leading you from finance to Brexit crusader. How did that journey inspire your mission for a proud, independent UK?
So, my family, just to clarify a couple, my family didn't escape Pakistan. My father is Pakistani, my mother is English. And they sent the three of us, my two siblings and myself, to boarding school in 1978 and 79 because of turmoil in Pakistan. But they stayed there. And so we had an ongoing connection with Pakistan while we went through boarding school, going home for holidays and so on. But actually, my view of life, if I were to point to anything that has crafted my vision of the United Kingdom, it would really be to tradition and to the way I was brought up, believing, as I did, in the United Kingdom and its history, and being incredibly proud, frankly, of the British Empire and what the United Kingdom had achieved in its sort of zenith. And so I'm not really a rebel. I'm not a kind of maverick who's kicking up against the system. I'm someone who traditionally is very British, and I think, even though I might be half Pakistani, I think I have red, white, and blue going through my veins, and I don't want to do too many dramatic things with the UK. I want the UK to be the country which I went to school in the 1980s, a country where freedom of speech was taken for granted, where actually there was no institutional racism of which I was aware, where we had a settled culture, where immigrants who came to the country were aspirational and similarly believed in the UK, where there was a belief that if one worked and aspired and had ambition, anything was possible. Where the with Maggie's sort of I was a Maggie child as well, Maggie Thatcher child, and what she drilled into me that brilliant decade from 79 to 91 was that you work hard, you do your bit, you pay your taxes, and you'll be fine, and everything will come to you. And that culture of go-gettingness as opposed to dependency was also part of my formative years. And I'd like the UK to go back to that. We've become a country, I think, hooked on borrowing, spending, taxing, redistribution of wealth, killing personal aspiration. And so, what I think I stand for, what I really want is a restoration of the UK as opposed to any dramatic reforms. Does that make sense?
Oh no, absolutely. And what you said, Ben, very publicly is you want to make it normal to believe in our country and counter what you call Labour's reckless policies. What is your boldest plan then to unite the right and to restore sovereignty?
So I have taken control of a political party, and that party's constitution is being drafted at the moment. The constitution, I hope, when it's revealed, will indicate a party that has both stability of thought, but um, brave thought, and capable of holding its ground, but with its leaders being held in check by a democratic process and by people who will ensure that the leadership deliver for the membership of the party. Um, One of the things that strikes me, Andrew, about the United Kingdom, and I think it's part of the heart of one of the many um, uh, areas in which the UK's politics has gone wrong, is that we don't have parties that are really well structured, and where the people can genuinely have a democratic influence on the political party, which can then represent their views in Parliament. We've had for the last 10 years, for example, a parliament that's disconnected with the people, often standing in opposition to it. And what I hope through this new party, if I achieve nothing else in my political career, if I can leave the country with a party that is properly structured and has the ability to connect with the people of the country, filter those ideas back to the leadership, make sure that the party is ideologically solid, sound, occupied by great thinkers, fearless speakers, and holding each other in check. Um, if I can create that kind of organization, then I hope it can actually go off and deliver for the country without turning on the importance of one or two individuals because they happen to be terrific, personas. Um, I want stability and strength in the country, and I think if I can produce a political party that delivers those two things, then it should just do it automatically. It might take time, but it would deliver for the country automatically.
Yeah. I mean, you told me when you came on the show beforehand that Britain doesn't need another political party, which is why you set up the Great British PAC, basically to try and unite the right. What made you change your mind on that?
I think that it's frankly, without wishing to have a go at him, it's frankly down to Nigel Farage's inability ideologically to hold the line and fundamentally to organize his own party, Reform UK, which used to be my party, along democratic lines. And I think Reform UK is so fundamentally flawed in the way that it's structured and led that irrespective of how well it might be doing in the polls, which seems to be the only yardstick by which Nigel Farage judges his success, not what he's actually saying and doing, but just how he's doing in the polls. Irrespective of how he's doing in the polls, I think Reform UK will fail. And I see no route back for Reform UK, frankly, irrespective of how it's doing in the polls. And I reached that conclusion eventually when Rupert Lowe was thrown out of the party. Um, and Rupert Lowe is one of many who've experienced the kind of malicious um, character assassination that Farage and his cohort of colleagues tried to deliver upon Rupert Lowe. There have been hundreds of people who've been on the end of it, but I think they reached a new low, for want of a better word. They reached a new low with Rupert when they trumped up a police complaint. I think that's absolutely beyond the pale. And, if you've got a leadership in Reform UK that chucks out a very good man, arguably one of the best parliamentarians, not arguably, one of the best parliamentarians in the Commons, and on the way out, you make false accusations against him, then you should yourself be thrown out of your party. People often say, Rupert, get over it, reconcile. There can be no reconciliation where someone's made an attempt to get you incarcerated. Let's, for a second, just pause on that. They reported him to the police, presumably with an aim to get him imprisoned. That is Nigel Farage. He should be nowhere near office. And because he controls Reform UK in the way that he does, it's not democratized. It doesn't have the kind of checks and balances that I hope my party will have. Um, Nigel Farage has to go. But Nigel Farage can't go out of Reform because he is Reform. Reform and Nigel Farage are synonymous. So Reform has to go. And that means the only conclusion with which you're left is sadly a new party has to enter the fray. And as confusing as that might be for the so-called right, um, I think it's an absolutely necessary component if the country is to be saved at the next general election.
And we talked about the new Lowe with Rupert Lowe. I mean, apart from trying to get him incarcerated, there was also suggestions about dementia. And I've seen it reported in the press that Rupert's considering suing, or he may already started proceedings on that sort of basis. What's the latest on that?
So the latest is that last Thursday, that's Thursday, have I got this right? 16th of April. Um, a letter before action was sent to Reform UK, Lee Anderson and Zair Youssef, giving them a period of time, I understand, in which to retract the false claims made against Rupert. And if they don't do that, litigation will follow.
Okay, well, keep us posted on that sort of side. Now, you talk about taking over this new political party, and as you rightly point out, you're still formulating it so you don't fall into the same trap. But the word integrity, where did that come from?
So the Integrity Party, which is the party I've taken over, is something set up by two individuals in November last year. And they've been pressing me to, frankly, take it over ever since they set it up, or to at least join it and lead it and so on. And and I declined and I declined and I declined. And then when the Rupert Lowe incident happened, I picked up the phone to them and said, okay, well, let's have a look at that. And I explained to them that we would need to restructure the party completely. Um, and we would need to have this new constitution and a leader. By the way, I'm not the leader of the party. The leader I hope will emerge once the constitution's in place and I've got, a number of people into the requisite roles that I hope to fill, and they will then find a leader. Um, and I was attracted to this party because it exists, it's brand new, and it has a bank account. And believe it or not, Andrew, getting a bank account is quite challenging. So it was a kind of ready-made vehicle which I could use to do what I'm now doing.
Yeah. Well, Nigel's had his own run-ins with bank accounts and was famously debanked by Coots, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was.
Can you shine any spotlight on that?
Yeah, so the reason Nigel was debanked was completely wrong. And it was born out of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the regulatory regime of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Coots, as far as I can see, reached the conclusion that he was not the kind of individual they would like as a client of Coots because of the views he holds on various subjects. Um, and that is an extraordinary step. It wasn't, by the way, because he was a politically exposed person, a PEP. That it wasn't the PEP regulations that did for Nigel with Coots. It was their view of his views, and it's an extraordinary thing that an entirely commercial organization can decide to get rid of a presumably a profit center, a client, a profit center. Um, because of the views they hold. And I think it attests to the damage also being done to our economy and our country through regulations like DEI and this kind of embracing of all things extreme liberal. This notion that you have to hold a certain set of views to be acceptable, not just within society, but also, in business. Business, really, in my view, um, whether or not you do business with someone turns principally on whether or not you can make money out of them. That's what the point of business is. And I think if you lose sight of that and you start allowing other forces to take control of your decision-making process, then you're going to do damage to your own organization and, eventually, obviously, the economy. So it's a great example, frankly, of why DEI is so damaging to the economy of the United Kingdom and why it should be ditched.
Yeah. Now, you've mentioned the Integrity Party, and as you say, you're still formulating a number of issues behind the scenes. In spite of the fact you can't go into too many details at this stage, what would be the main differences between you and Reform?
Main differences are that one, we would wear our heart on our sleeves. We wouldn't shy away from making the difficult arguments that are required to be made in order to save the United Kingdom. Farage, for all his bluster, is actually a coward when it comes to speaking. He will say what he believes to be politically expedient in order to curry as much favor as he possibly can. And whilst I appreciate you can't get into office, unless you carry a democratic mandate. I don't think you should prostitute your views and your principles in order to achieve that. Nor, by the way, do I think it's necessary to do it, because the British people, in my opinion, are of the sorts of views that this new party that I'm establishing will carry. A proud, independent, sovereign, prosperous United Kingdom with borders, with policies made for its people, with its people's interests being championed and put first and foremost. And I know this empirically, that this is where the British people are, because they voted for it in 2016. The biggest democratic mandate handed to a British government was essentially to re-empower the democratic unit of the United Kingdom. That's what the vote for Brexit was. And they reasserted that when they voted Theresa May in 2017. Then they voted for the Brexit Party in May 2019 to send a message to government that it wanted the UK to be back in control. They did it again with Boris Johnson. And frankly, I think the British electorate have tried so hard to they've repeatedly tried so hard to get their politicians to listen to them, and have been repeatedly ignored. And that's the reason that the turnout in 2024 was so low. Labour won this thumping majority on fewer votes than it got in 2019, which is absurd. And so I know the British people are crying out for what it is that I hope this new party I'm establishing will offer. And Nigel Farage is making a huge mistake by turning his back on the principles that made him popular in the first place. And let me enumerate them for you, if I may. So he is on the record. I know you know this, Andrew, but listeners may not. That he's not worried about the rate of demographic change in the country. He worries about the rate of change in our culture, but not the demography. Of course, they're two sides of the same coin. It's an entirely incoherent statement to say you're not worried about the change of the rate of change of the demography in the country. He's on the record saying he's against illegal migration into the country, but simultaneously he says he is not in favor of detaining and deporting every single illegal migrant in the country. Well, if you're not in favor of the mass deportation of illegal migrants, you offer no deterrent against those seeking to come into the country. He says he doesn't wish to politically alienate Islam, at the same time as saying that there's a dramatic sectarian change in the way our politics is being practiced in this country, and that by 2050, this country is going to be in a very difficult position. And let me be clear, no one. No one is, least of all me, is advocate. No one should advocate, and least of I'm not advocating some kind of attack on Islam. That's not the point. What Nigel Farage is completely missing is that it is our own delicate culture and our own delicate form of democracy and constitutional ecosystem that is being threatened at the moment. And we've got to become much more assertive in the way that we deal with that. You don't make peace with ideologies and with systems and beliefs that are challenging you. What you do is you become more assertive and you convert those views towards your own. In other words, as Nigel Farage has so often said, multiculturalism isn't working, and we need integration and assimilation, frankly. And that doesn't happen by taking the line Farage is now taking. Um, and his candidate, for example, Andrew, in Runcorn and Helsby, the by-election that's coming up, Sarah Pochin, she was attending transgender events. She was celebrating the settling of Syrian and Afghan refugees in Cheshire East. These are all things that are completely antithetical to the foundations of reform. Nigel Farage posted a thing on X, an article from Guardian, commending another candidate that Reform has found that is in favor of reparations for the slave trade. In other words, a candidate who is ashamed of British history. And, that's another crucial component of saving the United Kingdom, being proud of our history on the whole. And we should be proud of it because we're a great country and so on. So, in the pursuit of power, Farage has completely given up on what we believed his ideological position to be. But the truth about Farage is that he doesn't have a political philosophical framework. Nigel Farage is the ultimate in political expedient. He is just about himself, the promotion of himself, and he'll do whatever it takes to keep himself at the center of attention. And so he, as evidenced by the way he treated Rupert Lowe, is deeply dangerous, frankly, to the country. And any right minded individual would now be working towards making sure reform does not succeed in 2029.
Yeah. Now, as you say, immigration is still a lightning rod issue. You've raised alarms about population replacement and the cultural impacts of high immigration alongside the DEI policies. UK population is projected to hit 72.5 million by 2032. Talk to me about the specific policies that you would champion to address immigration while fostering national unity.
So there should be an absolute freeze on immigration. There should be a moratorium on indefinite leave to remain, and there should be no more British citizenships handed out. That's the first step. Absolute, put a brake on everything that is causing a change, the rapid change that's taking place in this country. There should be a program, however complex and difficult it may be, there should be a program for the detention and then deportation to the extent possible of people in this country who have entered the country illegally. In other words, the mass deportation of illegal migrants. That should be established. And that would be a very expensive exercise. There would be a lot of money involved in doing it, and it will take time, but it's a much cheaper exercise, frankly, than the long-term adverse consequences at every single level that we would suffer if we don't do that. We would also enforce our borders. This notion that border control comes purely through forming deterrence in your own country is wrong. Border control is a physical process which needs to take place at the borders. So we have to reinstitute border control. We need boats and people, we need fast boats and people who are trained, and drones and sensors and barricades. And we need to intercept these dinghies, and we need to make it clear to people that they will not be allowed to enter British territorial waters and they should go back to France. The best way to stop the continued assault of our borders is to enforce our borders. Um, and I would also, so with all of that, freeze immigration, make it impossible for people to remain in the United Kingdom for the time being, detain and deport illegal migrants. I would have a positive program of integration. I would remove, ditch DEI. That has to go. And we have to be proud of British culture, our system. And there has to be a very positive integration program, which goes beyond simply understanding who the King of England is, the fact that we have the Union flag as our flag. Um, I think we've got to be singing. We've got to have a much more muscular form of Britishness now in schools and in our institutions. The way we teach our history, we should be singing the national anthem every morning at every school. There should be no madrasas in this country. Every single school should be teaching Christianity. Um, and so on. We've got to react to the threats that we are facing by responding in the way that I've just described.
Yeah, and we've touched on this previously, and I always like to give people a chance to respond on this program too, because people get little sound bites on other programs without digging into it. The Julia Hartley Brewer comment that has been haunting you. Let's put that one to bed. The thing about let them drown, put that into context and tell me what your real views are.
Yeah, well, thank you. It doesn't haunt me, by the way. I sleep very well at night, but because that was uh, frankly a mistake I made in a gotcha. Julia Hartley Brewer was trying to get a gotcha moment, and I gave it to her. But the discussion we were having was the one that I've just slightly had with you now, which is that we should be enforcing our borders, we should be intercepting these dinghies and sending them back. And the hypothetical picture she painted was of an illegal migrant in one of these dinghies producing a knife and stabbing his dinghy. I could have asked if I'd had the presence of mind where he got a knife and what his intentions were with this knife beyond stabbing his own dinghy, but anyway, I didn't. And stabs his own dinghy. They're all in the water. Now, would you rescue them? And I said, well, I wouldn't put them on a British boat because once they're on a British boat, they're protected by British law. They're effectively on British territory. And then you get into the issues of detain, deport, and all the rest of it. I would give them another dinghy and say, here's a dinghy, climb back into it, and off you go back to France. And she said, well, what if they stabbed that one? Would you? And and it became a ridiculous discussion. And she said, would you eventually let them drown? And I said, well, if they put themselves in harm's way and they refuse to save their own lives, they must be left to face the consequences of their own decisions. And that was the mistake I made, actually suggesting that personal agency should kick in at some point and they should be left to suffer the consequences of their own decisions. But the reality is, Andrew, that the interception of dinghies is not far-fetched, as some people would make out. The Belgian authorities intercept dinghies coming off their own shores. They do it in the sea using the kind of fast boats and trained personnel that I've just described. And they've reduced the launch of dinghies from Belgian shores by 92% over the last few years. It works. And of course it works. And the notion that these people coming across from France would willfully stab their dinghies and put themselves into the freezing cold waters of the North Sea, potentially dying, is the wrong one because they've already proven their desire to live and to improve their lives by leaving France and coming to England. They're economic migrants. They're not suicide bombers or suicidal by nature. They want to live and they want to prosper. That's why they're coming to the UK. But they shouldn't be allowed to come to the UK because they're seeking illegal means to do it. They should be intercepted in the Channel and told to go back to France.
Okay. You've mentioned that Britain is at breaking point. You blame the elite who are punishing those who notice. Again, Ben, tell me what specific steps you would take to deliver the prosperous UK you envision.
So, a key component of prosperity is well, there are two things. People often talk about, if I can just digress for a second, people often talk about their economic ideology and they hold that forth. So you would have heard that, particularly now with President Trump trying to institute tariffs, that free trade is a cornerstone of Western capitalism. That we should have basically a low taxation system, low regulations, and we should all be allowed to trade and do whatever we want within reason. And by and large, I agree with that. But the economy should be and is, in my mind, the servant of a stable constitution and a stable culture and a secure people. These are critical things in a country, and the economy should be crafted to ensure that those three principles, those three major aims, are delivered. Um, and so for me, it's much more important to ensure that our democracy is returned to a state of health, that we sever these international laws that we keep having quoted at us whenever we want to do something that's in the British people's interest, that we withdraw ourselves from the international institutions, which similarly prevent us from charting a path that is for the benefit of the United Kingdom, that we abolish the unelected quangos that stand in the way again of our elected officials being able to do what is right for the UK. And we've had lots of examples of that recently, where an inability of elected officials to actually deliver that which they wish to deliver. And alongside all of that, we need a restoration of our culture in the way that I've just described. And I think if you constitutionally uh, cure the United Kingdom, take it back to a position where it genuinely is control of its own destiny, its elected representatives can be held to account for the decisions they make, and you restore the cultural context of the United Kingdom, then I think the prosperity will follow. The economics that's required to be practiced will follow. But to enumerate a few things to answer your question, I would ditch right now where we are right now. I would ditch net zero. I would ditch DEI, both of which are, I think, supremely damaging to our economic prosperity. Um, I would I would have tariffs on goods coming into the UK. I think global free trade has gone too far. The notion that we should all trade to the point where we've de-industrialized our own country uh, made it impossible for us to produce stuff in the UK. And this is one of the things with the European Union. As you'll be aware, Andrew, we've carried a deficit of £100 billion a year, just about every year for the last 20 years with the European Union. That is a massive amount of sterling that has left our shores buying German goods. So instead of this, the Remainers, the Unit Party, the sort of global liberal order all saying, oh no, we've got to have closer relationships with the EU. Actually, I'd be deterring the EU from doing business with us. I would want to bring production back to the UK. If you want to level up the north and the more deprived areas of this country, you've got to give them something to produce. There's got to be some economic activity. You can't do it through redistribution of wealth. That doesn't work. We've tried that. You end up going bust, which is where we've frankly ended up. Um, so that's the kind of vision I would have, a resurgence of industry in this country, a deregulation, a lowering of taxes, an imposition of tariffs if necessary on the EU and other countries that take advantage of the UK, an onshoring of jobs, and a revitalization of the United Kingdom constitutionally, culturally, and therefore economically.
So make Britain great again.
Effectively make Britain great again, yes.
Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we can do a deeper dive into some of those, look at the relationship with Trump and what that might mean for the future, and also discuss the latest about Tommy Robinson. Don't touch that dial.